Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 160. When the wife says, "It's my husband's fault our sex life isn't better." Ooh, dun, dun, dun. All right, everyone. Welcome to today's episode where we are really going to dive into this topic because this definitely comes up, right? We have a wife that usually comes to me who is struggling with the sex life in her marriage. And a lot of times this is the phrase that comes out, like, it's my husband's fault. This is my husband's fault that we don't have a better sex life. And so as we get into it, some very interesting things come out. They come to the surface. We get some really good insight and revelation. And what we're going to find out is this concept of it being the husband's fault, or actually anyone's fault, is going to need to go to the wayside, right? We're going to need to kick that thought out. It does a lot of damage when we start finding fault. So I want to start off with a story. So this happened just this last weekend. I went for a girls' night out. Yes. It was so fun. There were several girls. We decided we were all going to get together. We were going to go out for dinner. And then after that, we decided to go for dessert, and it was to a restaurant I had never been to before. So I was super excited. We had good food. We had great conversation, a lot of fun and laughter. And we even made plans to do it again and go somewhere else and do something fun. And so there was just a lot of happiness that was taking place that night. And I really want to just talk about that as a precursor, right? This is so important for women when it comes to our system of arousal, right? There's like an actual system. There's a sequence of how things play out. And when we're able to put these good things in, like having a girls' night out, having some downtime, doing things that are fun, fueling our soul, that has nothing to do with our husband, right? We do that for ourselves. That is self-love. That is self-care. And when we are doing that, we put ourselves on the intimacy trek and we get ourselves on that so that the rest of the process and the sequence that leads to a sexual experience, a positive sexual experience, is put into place. So when we are able to have a fun girls' night out, we do that for ourselves and we set ourselves up for success. Usually when we do this, that we end up putting ourselves in a place where we are open to being intimate with our spouse. A lot of times we're closed-minded, right? We have these ideas of like, not in the mood. I don't want to do it. I did too many things today. I'm too busy. I'm too tired. But when we are able to do something fun like this, it usually opens our mind to the idea of being intimate. So this is a really good thing. And I bet it's something that most women don't even know about themselves. And I bet husbands don't know this about their wife. So for a husband to be supportive of his wife having a girls' night out consistently, this is a really good and positive thing. So now, after this wonderful evening out, I came home and spent a little time with the kids before they went to bed. And then Nick and I ended up staying up late together. We were just chit-chatting and we were full in conversation, just talking about all kinds of things, laughing, smiling. We were totally being connected. And I love that this lasted for a good amount of time. It wasn't required, but it wasn't like a 2-minute conversation either. Like we were both enjoying it. And I remember even having the awareness that he wasn't rushing things. Like, oh, he might want to be intimate tonight, but he's not rushing it. And I really appreciated that. And so throughout this conversation, my awareness of his efforts to just be engaged in the conversation and to participate and really helped and added to my desire of wanting to be intimate. So just being involved in that conversation and having those positive thoughts about my husband contributed to me having a high desire for intimacy. So I really want to point that out, that for any husbands listening, it's not that girls just want to talk just to talk. It's because it opens things up for us when it comes to intimacy. It is a doorway. It is a gateway. It's a portal, right? And so husbands, really pay attention to this. This is a portal. Good conversation is a portal. Now, after quite some time of being involved in this awesome conversation with Nick, I remember having the thought, all right, let's just get to it. Like, let's get into it, right? And my desire was high and I had good thoughts. And it actually led me to, all right, let's take this to the next level. So I remember as I was thinking about that, because I'm aware of the intimacy trek, I challenged myself a little bit further. I was like, okay, what kind of experience am I looking to have here tonight? Do I want to have like the full journey, right? And usually I do. It's like 98% of the time I do. Every now and then, I will have the desire to not have the full experience, but maybe just part of it, the sexual experience. And I found that this night, that was the case. And so I remember thinking, I just want to be intimate. Let's just have intercourse. Let's go for sex. I'm not as interested as being fulfilled, orgasmically or in any other way. And so for me, I was okay with, hey, let's just have sex, and knowing that having intercourse is its own experience, right? For most women, the orgasm is not coming through the vagina, it's through the clitoris. And so if we don't spend time on the clitoris, we're probably not going to have an orgasm. It is the percentage of having an orgasm through sex and through intercourse, through the vagina, is much higher if you've already had an orgasm through the clitoris. So the clitoris comes first, and then a vaginal orgasm can come second. But let's be real, that's not usually the case because there's not a lot of nerve endings in the vaginal canal. So, but for me, just because of the state of mind I was in and because I was enjoying, my desire was I wanted to have the penetrative sex, and that was going to be enough for me. That means the goal for me was not an orgasm. It was just to be connected physically. So if I think about it, my desire to be intimate with my husband was high. It was probably at a 9. And so when I had the thought, okay, let's just get to it, I knew that I was also skipping a certain aspect of the intimacy track. And I was okay with that. I was like, okay, let's skip arousal. Let's just go straight for intercourse. So as soon as I kind of went through that process in my mind, a very interesting thing happened. Nick ended up saying the exact thing I was thinking. He was like, okay, let's get to this, right? Let's get into it. Now, a lot of times if he says something and it's like exactly what I'm thinking, I'm like, yes, he's reading my mind. We're on the same page. We're so connected. We're vibing, right? But this time I didn't do that. I didn't think like, oh, we're on the same page. In fact, I definitely felt a shift immediately. I felt something shift, and I felt my desire to be intimate drop. Now, it wasn't a significant drop. I just noticed that there was a shift there. And in that moment, I wanted to blame him. I wanted to say that it was his fault for saying that. And I really started to wonder and question, like, why would he do that? Why would he say, like, let's just get to it? He knows the process. He knows the intimacy trek. Why would he sabotage sex like that? Why would he do that to himself and to me? And so when I started thinking that, I actually ended up making it mean that, oh, he's skipping my process, right? He's not paying as much attention to me. He's not considering me, even though we had spent almost 2 hours in deep conversation. That was awesome, right? But this is what our brain does. This is what our brain does. Did I try to think these thoughts on purpose? No, I did not. So I made it mean that he was skipping my process. Isn't that funny? Because my own thought was, hey, I'm okay if we skip the arousal phase. I'm okay if we skip around. But if Nick wants to skip, then I'm not okay with it. Wow. Right. So this concept of skipping was okay if it came from me. But when Nick said, like, let's move to the next thing, I was a little bothered by it. And so then I was blaming him for it. So not only did I view him as sabotaging sex, I was also sabotaging sex with my own thoughts. Now, thank goodness I have high thought awareness because I was able to realize a lot of this. But I want to pause the story here and talk about a few things that happened and the few things that took place, because if we don't have the awareness that these things are happening, then we will just stay in a state of blame. So I want you to really let that sink in for a second. If we don't have the awareness that there is an intimacy trek, that there's a process that women go through almost 90% of the time, or almost 100% of the time, we go through the intimacy trek in order, step by step. If we're not aware of that and can't challenge that when things come up, we will probably stay in a place of blame, and it will usually be towards our spouse, towards our husband. So at that point, we are contributing to our sex life not being better, right? We're blaming our husband. And if we're blaming him, that means we're sitting back and saying, okay, hubby, you do all the fixing, you do all the changing because it's all your fault. Now, when we blame somebody, we find fault. That's one of the key definitions for blame. We find fault in them. We push the responsibility onto another person. Now, this concept of finding fault means that our brain is paying more attention and more active in looking for the weaknesses of another person, their failings. This is the definition of fault. We are looking for the physical or intellectual imperfections or impairments. That means our brain, the wife's brain, is more active and more focused on looking for those things. And it's where we put the responsibility for wrongdoing onto our husband. So in this situation with my story, I would say, okay, my desire shifting and going down that's on my husband, and it's his responsibility, and he did something wrong by saying those words and shifting my desire and making it go down a notch. This is what our brain does. Now, most of us don't have the awareness that our brain is giving us these thoughts on autopilot. It's doing it automatically, and here's the key word, unintentionally, right? We didn't tell our brain to think these thoughts. Our brain just did. And it delivered those thoughts. It brought those thoughts to the forefront of our mind, and then we were thinking them. So it's really important to pay close attention to this concept of unintentionally. This is how our brain works. Our brain will deliver us thoughts that we have thought before because it's easy. And it's the path of least resistance. And so in order for us to think new thoughts, we have to put in some effort. We have to challenge our brain. We have to challenge our thoughts and say, you know what? I don't like how that thought made me feel. That thought triggered some negative feelings within me and my desire went down. I don't like that. Now I can do something about that, right? We don't need to blame our spouse for that because this is happening in our own brain. When we want to blame our spouse for all these things, this should be a flashing neon light to ourselves that we are lacking a skill. Usually when we're blaming, we are lacking a skill. Okay, so that is an invitation to each of us to level up, figure out which skill we need, probably a thinking skill, right? Because this is the basis for all the actions we take. And let's get after it. Let's develop these new skills. So I want to really take a second also to look at the difference between blaming and finding fault with the concept of something just being an accident or a mistake or a blip. So an accident can be defined as an unfortunate incident that happens unexpectedly and unintentionally, sometimes resulting in damage, injury, or loss. So this is kind of what happened to me, right? My desire level was at a 9, and then there was a little bit of a loss in my desire. It went down a level, but it wasn't intentional. Like, honestly, let's think about this for a second. Let's be real. Do you honestly think that my husband wanted my desire for sex to go down? No. Does he want to say things that might cause my desire for sex to go down? No. Right. So these things are happening unintentionally on his part as well as my part. So let's all be real about that. Let's heighten our awareness of that process, that things are happening unintentionally. Now, when accidents happen, we just say that was an accident. No one meant for this thing to happen, right? There was no intention for an accident to happen. That's part of the definition. And so an accident is an event that happens by chance and without a deliberate cause. It's unforeseen and it's unplanned. Do you think my husband planned to say those words to me and get me out of the mood? No. That's the opposite of what he wants to have happen. It's the opposite of what I want to have happen. When something happens by accident, it's the lack of intention and purpose, right? Our husbands don't want to cause us harm and damage. They don't want to cause our desire for sex to be low. That's probably the last thing they want. They are not doing these things intentionally and with purpose. And then one final definition for accident, it's an unfortunate event, especially from ignorance, right? It's just we didn't know. This is like one of the biggest contributors, right? It's like most people don't even know that the intimacy trek exists. So if women don't know it about themselves, husbands for sure don't know it because they are taught something completely different out in the world. So we need to make a shift from thinking about things as being our husband's fault, right? To like, that's just an accident. That's just an error. That's just a little blip that took place. And as we are able to do this, we are able to take some of the weight and the heaviness of blaming our spouse for how our sex life is, right? And it puts it into a perspective of like, oh, well, if it's just an accident, if that's unintentional, if that's just a little blip, well, I could fix that. So let's get back to the story for a second. So during all of this, during this deep conversation and me wanting to shift into having sex, and then my husband saying the exact thing I was thinking, and then me getting a little bugged by it, I want to talk about the fact that there was a high level of thought awareness taking place for me. And this is valuable. I want each husband and each wife to really think about this. A heightened level of thought awareness is a skill. You have to learn it. You have to develop it. You have to practice it. But when you do, man, it's priceless. It's so valuable because you have such great insight into yourself, not the other person. You can understand the other person better, your spouse better, because you understand that their brain is also going through that same process. But deep personal insight can start to take place. So I started to challenge myself in the middle of all this. I was like, why would I get mad? What's happening with me? I'm having the same thought. My husband has the same thought. He verbalizes it, and now I'm bugged. What's happening? I'm going to challenge myself. So I checked in with myself and I said, okay, where's my desire right now? Now that he has said he wants the same thing I do, but I'm bugged by it. Where's my desire? And I found that my desire was still high, right? Is probably because I was having this inner dialogue about my own thought process. My desire, it went down one notch, but that's not significant. It went from a 9 to an 8. And I was like, ooh, Shelly, this is good. Desire is still high. That is on your side, girl. Let's run with it. I love that I didn't get so extreme and say to myself, like, oh, I felt that shift. Now everything's done. It's over, right? And it's all Nick's fault. I didn't do that. The desire was still high. I recognized it. I labeled it as an 8. And so I decided, you know what? Let's go after this. Let's still go after intercourse. Let's do this. And my motivation was still high. My intention was still positive and high. And was it at a 9? No, but it was still at an 8. And that's awesome. And so I decided to take advantage of that. So we had intercourse, we had sex, and it was fabulous, right? It was great. After we had sex, I want to just clarify that we had sex and I did not have an orgasm, and I still viewed it as fabulous. But that's because I had already made that decision that that's the type of experience I wanted to have. So I would still rate the whole experience at an 8 or a 9, right? Really, really awesome. It completed my desires. Nick and I fulfilled my desires sexually that night. After we were done, we kind of decided maybe let's go after the orgasm. And so we attempted to do that. And this became a little bit more of a challenge because I had skipped the arousal process, right? We skipped that stage in the intimacy track. So going back and then trying to get to the orgasm, that became more of a challenge. And after a while, I found that I was not interested in doing that because I'd already been so fulfilled. So that's when the orgasm became a little bit more challenging. But overall, the overall experience was fabulous. And also what I really liked about the experience is that when it was all said and done, I was still very intrigued by it all. I wasn't mad. I wasn't angry. There was no negativity. I was still very fascinated. And so I knew that I would want to dive deeper into that whole experience and explore it a little bit more. One thing I realized as I did ponder on it is that I probably could have done a little bit better. Even with the skills I had, there were a few things I wish I would have drawn upon in that moment when I felt that shift. And it made me realize, okay, Shelly, increase your own awareness. Remember this for next time if that happens again. And so I used this as a learning experience so that next time things can be better, right? So this is a way to improve our sex life, again, without blaming our spouse. So if we look at challenging experiences as a learning process, a learning opportunity, then this becomes more effective, and we will stop looking at our experiences as either just good or bad, and in all or nothing thinking, and in these extreme ways, but just say, oh, this is what I learned. I'm going to keep that in mind for next time. And so as I was thinking about it, I was really realizing that I could think a new thought about my brain detour. During that time, when I felt that shift, when I felt my desire go down one notch, I could have had a few different thoughts that probably would have been more beneficial and probably would have served me better and added to the experience a little bit more, instead of thinking something negative about Nick, right? And his sex sabotage. And so this challenged me, right, to look into things a little bit more like, okay, well, what new thought could I have thought instead that would have been more effective and more beneficial? And so I realized there's a few little phrases that would work. One, I could say, you know what? There goes my brain. I'm having a brain boo-boo. Right? Think about when you're talking to kids or neighbor friends, like, and their kids. And if we use the word boo-boo, when there's a little bit of a scrape or something, we are able to take some of the heaviness off of it. And we're like, oh, let's just get some Neosporin. Let's put a Band-Aid on it, right? We can do that with our own brain and our own thoughts and take away some of the pain and heaviness that comes with these thoughts of like, this is all my husband's fault, that I don't have desire and that our sex life is where it's at. So this makes our brain be able to think there's an easy fix if it's just a boo-boo. And we don't need to fix our entire persona of ourselves or our spouse, because that's not an easy thing to do. And it usually doesn't go well if we try to control and fix our spouse. And we should never be trying to do that. But if we use the word boo-boo, that really helps our brain going, oh, I think I can fix that. We could also say, oh, that was just a brain blip, right? If I think it's all my husband's fault that he took my desire down, we can just say, oh, that's just a brain blip. Oh, I need to do something about that. I have the ability to do that. A brain blooper, a mental hiccup, right? Oh, I'm just having a mental hiccup. I can fix that. A brain fog, right? My brain was a little foggy for a second there. Let me clear things out. A mental misdirection, right? A thought detour or a desire detour. Oh, my desire just took a detour for a minute. Let me get back on track, back on route. That was a momentary miscalculation of my brain. Or we could say, you know what? That was an unexpected detour that my brain just went on. Let me get back on track here. Or that was even a surprise change of plans. I wasn't expecting that change. I wasn't expecting my mind to go there. But now that I'm aware, let's circle back around. When we're able to have some of these phrases in our mind, it's so much easier to get back on track and to be able to have a positive effect on our desire. So that was something that really came to my mind, was to keep some of those phrases in mind. I really like the idea of a brain boo-boo. I think that's my favorite one. And so I'm going to keep that tucked away so that I can start using that more often, so that in that situation, if it arises again, it will be easy for me to say, oh, that's just a brain boo-boo. I'm going to circle back around and think a new thought instead. And I think I could have probably advocated for my arousal, that part that I skipped, the arousal section in the intimacy trek. If I really wanted to go for the orgasm, I could have said, you know what? Yes, that's great. Let's go for the orgasm, but I need to get my body in the phase of arousal. It wasn't there. And advocate for that if that is my goal. So I just want to say, as we get to the end of this episode, that using these new phrases, that is very compassionate. It's compassionate on ourselves when we have that awareness that We're not doing these things on purpose with our own thinking, and our spouse is definitely not doing things on purpose with the things that they say and the way that their brain thinks either. It's a way to really heighten compassion for ourselves and our brain's efforts. Our brain is trying to do good by us, and a lot of compassion for our spouse and our husband's brain, and that our husband's brain is also trying to do positive work for him. And so when we are able to have more compassion for ourselves and our spouse, this is a wonderful thing for our marriage. It's a lot of self-love. It's a lot of self-respect. It's self-care, not only for ourselves, but for our spouse and for our marriage as a whole, and also for the concept of sex as a whole. That way, we're not just throwing away the whole concept of sex and intimacy because it's a challenge. And so anytime we're able to increase our thought awareness and heighten it, some beautiful things will happen. Our skills will also increase. Our success will also increase. Our closeness will also increase. Our marriage will get better, and our intimacy will get better. So getting involved in life coaching and thought work has many, many benefits. And finally, the most amazing benefit is that we get to feel amazing. When we use thought awareness and we use life coaching skills, we feel empowered in our own lives, even in our sex life. And when we feel empowered, that feels amazing. Staying in blame mode and victim mentality mode, especially with our spouse, the one we love deeply, it feels awful. It feels powerless. It feels hopeless. Like we can't do anything about it. But when we are involved in thought work on purpose, that feels amazing. And don't we want that? Don't we want to feel amazing? So I would like to end with an invitation to all you husbands who are listening. Learn about the intimacy track. If you don't know what it is, you need my membership ASAP. You need to learn about the intimacy track so that you have a complete intellectual understanding of your wife's arousal system. And for all you wives listening, you also need to have a complete and thorough understanding of the intimacy track for yourself. And we need to practice using the phrases that I just discussed when you feel a shift in your emotions and when you want to blame. You got to start using some of those phrases. And so finally, when you start to think like, why would he say that? Why would he do that? I want you to replace that with a better, more beneficial, and more serving thought of, he never meant to do that, right? He never meant to say that with bad intentions. He never meant to sabotage our sex life, because that's true. And so also an invitation for all you wives out there, if these things are novel to you or you want a better understanding, make sure to join our Make It Meaningful membership. It's only $39 a month, and you will get our entire course about this stuff with even more detail and depth. And so make sure you check that out on shelly.andersoncoaching.com. So think about those things this next week and see if you can start using some of those phrases. Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me again next week.